welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the situation in the Middle East. U.S. President Donald Trump says Israel and Iran have agreed to a ceasefire deal. This comes just hours after Iran launched missiles at a U.S. military base in Qatar in retaliation against the U.S. bombing of key Iranian nuclear sites. Washington has decided to extend the state of national emergency posed by North Korea's nuclear program, extending it for another year after it was first declared in 2008. South Korea's consumer sentiment improved this month to the highest level in 4 years. The central bank says this was led by expectations over the second supplementary budget and the new administration's economic policies. U.S. President Donald Trump says Israel and Iran have agreed to a ceasefire deal to officially end the conflict between the two countries. For more on this, we have our Park Konu on the line for us. Konu, do fill us in.
Yes, indeed. U.S. President Donald Trump announced on Monday that a total and complete ceasefire between the two countries has been agreed and is set to take effect at Tuesday midnight Eastern Standard Time. The announcement was posted on Donald Trump's social media, stating that the ceasefire will begin after Israel and Iran wind down final missions, bringing an end to what Trump referred to as the 12-day war. Trump said both sides will remain peaceful and respectful throughout the process and congratulated them for having the stamina, courage, and intelligence to bring the conflict to a close. He also expressed his hope that the ceasefire will be a lasting one. According to Reuters, Trump and U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance have been discussing the ceasefire deal with Qatar's emir. And Qatar's prime minister also said there was an agreement from Iran in favor of a ceasefire. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, during a phone call with Trump, reportedly said that Israel would agree to a ceasefire only if Iran halts its attacks. Still, questions remain about whether the ceasefire will actually hold. So one expert says Trump's announcement may seem one-sided, but it likely came after prior coordination with both sides.
President Trump may appear to have unilaterally declared a ceasefire, but he likely urged both Iran and Israel to end the war swiftly. So far, the ceasefire seems to be holding, but whether it lasts depends on how well both countries observe it over the next 24 hours. Some may see Trump's sudden post as a calculated move to pressure the two into a ceasefire during a difficult moment in negotiations. It's possible, but more likely that some level of agreement was already in place.
And the expert, while reiterating that despite Trump's sudden announcement on social media appearing to be somewhat of a political strategy, the two sides were likely already in agreement behind the scenes. So for now, we'll have to wait and see what further responses are announced by the countries involved. And that's all I have for you now. Back to you, Eun-ji.
All right, Kono, thank you for the updates. Do keep us posted. Now, before U.S. President Donald Trump announced a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, Iran fired over a dozen missiles at a U.S. military base in Qatar in retaliation for the U.S. bombing of Iran's nuclear sites. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
In response to the United States' recent bombing of Iranian nuclear sites, Iran fired over a dozen missiles towards a U.S. base in Qatar on Monday. The missile attacks on the Al Udeid air base were intercepted by the U.S., leading to no casualties. According to U.S. President Donald Trump, the U.S. was warned in advance by Iran, adding the attacks were expected and were very effectively countered. He also said that 14 missiles were fired, with 13 being knocked down and one set free as it was headed in a non-threatening direction. Trump had summoned his top officials, including Defense Chief Pete Hegseth, Joint Chiefs Chair General Dan Kane, to the White House's Situation Room as the first reports of the Iranian strikes emerged. Taking to X on Monday, Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei said that Iran was not the aggressor and will not accept aggression from anyone under any circumstances. Calling it the logic of the Iranian nation, he said that his country will not submit to anyone's harassment. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi also said that Tehran's attack on the U.S. base in Qatar came in response to the U.S.'s aggression against Iran's territorial integrity and sovereignty. He warned Iran will be ready to respond again if the U.S. follows with further action. The Foreign Ministry also released a statement saying that Tehran only responded to the U.S. attacks and does not want to escalate tensions in the region. Meanwhile, the Arab Parliament on Monday strongly condemned Iran's attack on the U.S. base in Qatar, calling it a clear and unacceptable violation of Qatari sovereignty and international law. The parliament also called for a de-escalation of the conflict in the region. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
44 South Korean nationals and 1 U.S. citizen of Korean descent have been safely evacuated from Israel to Egypt. On Monday local time, the group crossed into Egypt using buses provided by the South Korean government in an operation coordinated by the Korean embassies and communities in Israel and Egypt. The Korean Association in Israel identified the evacuees, while embassy staff escorted them to the border and assisted with exit procedures. Upon arrival in Egypt, the Korean embassy in Cairo supported their entry and transportation to Cairo. The Korean community in Egypt has arranged homestays for the evacuees, while the embassy assists with booking flights to Seoul. The Foreign Ministry has again urged all remaining South Koreans in both Israel and Iran to leave promptly. So Trump announced a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. For more on this and the administration's foreign policy, we're joined by Professor Choi Hyun-jin, Associate Professor at the Department of Political Science at Kyung University. Professor Choi, thanks for joining us this morning.
For having me.
So the South Korean government recently has been working to minimize the impact caused by the conflict between Israel and Iran, but President Trump announced today that they've agreed to a ceasefire deal. What's your take on this, and does this mean there won't be any more economic or security threats for South Korea?
Yes, the ceasefire between Israel and Iran is definitely welcome news. It stopped the fighting and also lower the risk of a further escalation in the Middle East. But I think we should not relax too soon. So in the past, many ceasefires in the Middle East have broken down very quickly. So it is too early to say that this ceasefire will last. For South Korea, the risk of this conflict in the Middle East are not over yet. First, on the economic side, even with a ceasefire, the oil market is very sensitive. The most of Korean oil come from the Middle East. If something goes wrong again, especially in the Strait of Hormuz, for example, oil price could jump, and that would hurt our economy, especially transportation and the manufacturing industry. So we should keep building our own oil reserve and look for other energy options in case of this kind of emergency. And secondly, about security, the United States may still focus more on the Middle East for the time being, even after the ceasefire. And that could lead to less attention on the Indo-Pacific area, including the Korean Peninsula. And therefore, we must maintain close cooperation with U.S. Force Korea to maintain strong deterrence against North Korea. So in general, the ceasefire is definitely a welcome news, but it may not be the end of the story. So we must stay prepared and work well with allies like the United States and Japan to protect our own economy and also security.
Right, and speaking of North Korea, what lessons might the regime have drawn from the current situation in the Middle East? Should it be concerned about its own nuclear ambitions?
Yes, I think North Korea is closely watching this ongoing crisis in the Middle East. And my guess is one key lesson for Pyongyang is this. The Iran does not yet have a completed nuclear weapon, and it is being attacked by America and Israel. So North Korea will likely see this as a proof that only a fully developed weapon can truly protect the regime. So I think instead of giving up its own nuclear weapon, Pyongyang may push ahead with the further development of a strategic and also tactical nuclear weapon. So believing that this is the only way to avoid the fate of countries like Iran, Iraq, and Libya. But there's another side to this. The situation shows that nuclear capability alone does not solve everything. The Iran still faces economic sanction and diplomatic isolation, and also some risk of further escalation of war in the Middle East. The North Korea may learn that even with a strong weapon, any aggressive actions can lead to international pushback and instability. So while Pyongyang will likely continue its nuclear development, it may try to avoid any actions that could trigger a wider conflict in the region. So in general, I think North Korea sees nuclear weapon as a guarantee, but it also knows that how those weapons are used can bring serious consequences.
I see. And also, President Lee Jae-myung has decided not to attend this week's NATO summit in the Netherlands. So it appears that he will not be able to meet with Trump anytime soon. So how might this decision affect South Korea's relations with the United States and other European countries?
Yes, President Lee has decided not to attend the NATO summit, and this decision is very important because, as you mentioned, it means he won't be meeting President Trump anytime soon. And for this reason, some people might worry that this could slow down our diplomacy with the United States and also Europe. But I see this decision as a strategic one, not a step back. So after U.S. Airstrike on Iran's nuclear sites, the security situation in the Middle East is still uncertain. So in this situation, it was reasonable for President Lee to stay in Korea to focus more on domestic issues and global risk like energy price and financial markets. And also, it is worth noting that Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba is now also considering skipping the NATO summit. So this shows that President Lee is not alone. The other leaders like Ishiba are also changing their plans because of the ongoing tension in the Middle East. And diplomatically, South Korea is still very much engaged. So at the recent G7, the President Lee already showed he's committed to working with the key allies like the US and European countries. And even if there is no summit this week, communication with the US and Europe will likely continue through many other channels. So in general, so I don't think this will hurt Korean relationship with other countries. Instead, it shows that President Lee is being very careful, realistic, and also focus on national interest.
Right, like you just said, President Lee said he'll focus on national interest, and he also vowed to focus on pragmatic diplomacy. So how should his administration balance the intense rivalry between the U.S. and China throughout his term?
Yes, the pragmatic diplomacy is very important, and I agree with this principle. But however, as you mentioned, this is the era of great power rivalry, and at this time, it is very difficult to maintain balance between the two great powers. And there are some reasons. First, the United States is now expanding the role of the U.S. Force Korea beyond deterring North Korea. The concept of strategic flexibility that means that these U.S. troops could be used more actively beyond the Korean Peninsula to contain China. For example, the General Brunson, the U.S. Force Korea commander, recently described the Korean Peninsula as a fixed aircraft carrier located very close to Beijing. And this comment shows that how Washington views Korea as a key military platform in its regional strategy. And China is now responding to this by increasing military drills in the West Sea and also by constructing more artificial structure that appear to have military purpose. So this rising tension suggests that at least in the security and defense, it will be very difficult, if not impossible, for South Korea to maintain balance between the US and China. So I think while it may not be ideal, the most realistic option for South Korea is to maintain a strong alliance, military alliance with the United States and Japan, at least in the security domain. But at the same time, South Korea should continue to cooperate with China in trade and economy. And this kind of a selective and issue-based approach is the only way to protect Korean national interests in this era of great power rivalry.
I see. All right, Professor Che, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it.
Very much.
Global oil prices settled down more than 7% on Monday after Iran took no action to disrupt oil and gas tanker routes in the Strait of Hormuz, but instead attacked a U.S. military base in Qatar in retaliation for Washington's attack on its nuclear sites. Both the Brent crude futures and the U.S. West Texas Intermediate futures for August fell around 7.2%. Brent crude futures are trading at $71.48 a barrel, while the WTI futures are trading at $68.51 a barrel. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday took to his social media platform to demand that everyone keep oil prices down. He said that raising oil prices would mean playing into the hands of the enemy. U.S. President Donald Trump has also decided to extend the state of national emergency posed by North Korea's nuclear program. A notice on the Federal Register website shows the White House is seeking an extension of the national emergency first declared in 2008 under Executive Order 13466, which was due to expire this Thursday. The renewal will remain in effect for another year. The White House cited the continued existence of fissile material on the Korean Peninsula and the risk of proliferation, along with North Korea's actions and policies, as an unusual and extraordinary threat to the U.S. national security, foreign policy, and the economy. U.S. presidents can declare national emergencies to expand administrative powers during crisis, with annual reviews required for any extensions. And consumer sentiment in South Korea continued to improve in June, marking a third straight month of gains. According to the Bank of Korea on Tuesday, the composite consumer sentiment index rose to 108.7, up 6.9 points from May. That's the highest level in 4 years since June 2021. The central bank attributed the rise to reduced political uncertainty, the second extra budget, and expectations for new government policies. Housing market expectations also climbed sharply. The Housing Price Outlook Index jumped 9 points to 120 as more people anticipate house prices to rise over the next year, the highest since October 2021. A reading above 100 on both indices indicates optimism. And tomorrow, June 25th, marks the 75th anniversary of the outbreak of the Korean War. Historical records can give us some of the greatest insights into the war, and so the South Korean Army has been working on a restoration project since 2020. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung had a peek at how the project is going.
Apollonia Oud box, known for its excellent preservation qualities, is taken out from a mobile rack. Inside is a heavily damaged operations log from RK Army headquarters, written in February 1952. This is just one of 81,000 military pieces from the Korean War that were designated as National Registered Cultural Heritage in 2020. Marking the very first modern war records to be designated as National Heritage, Army Archives Management Group has been restoring Korean War records, already having successfully restored about 40,000 pieces since 2020.
I'm currently in the Military Policy Archives. This map records the changes in the location of the 6th Division's command post during the war. The green lines show advances, while the black lines indicate retreats.
Aside from 1.6-meter-long map of the Korean 6th Division's CP location routes, are records showing details such as information on the enemy and operational plans from major battles of the Korean War. These important documents of the past, however, had to go through a long and painstaking restoration process.
After over 70 years, the records show severe discoloration, contamination, creases, damage, and acidification. We are working to eliminate such damage and repair the missing parts.
Restoring is one thing, preserving is another. To make sure the records are safely preserved, the digitized records are put on microfilm, known for its outstanding longevity and durability. It is indeed a demanding process requiring a great deal of patience, but junior soldiers say this allows them to feel the patriotic spirit of those whose steps they are following in.
As a person in charge of the Korean War Records Restoration Project and a junior soldier, I take great pride in honoring the sacrifices of senior comrades and continuing the legacy of the patriotic spirit.
Through the restoration and preservation process, the 75-year history of the Korean War gets passed down to future generations. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News, Kaeryong.
Now let's take a look at some stories from around the world with our Ji. Good morning, Ji.
Morning, Ji.
So, Ji, let's begin with the EU and Canada deepening ties following a summit in Brussels.
Sure. Canada and the European Union have signed a new security and defense pact amid growing geopolitical threats and regional instability. On Monday, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, and European Council President Antonio Costa formalized the EU-Canada Security and Defense Partnership. The agreement, which is the first of its kind for the EU with a country from the Americas, aims to deepen collaboration in areas such as crisis management, cybersecurity, arms control, and support for Ukraine. A key component of the pact is Canada's potential participation in the EU's $172 billion joint procurement program, SAFE, facilitating joint defense acquisitions and industrial cooperation. The Canadian Prime Minister emphasized that the partnership would enable Canada to deliver on new capabilities more rapidly and more effectively. This reflects a strategic shift to diversify defense partnerships beyond traditional reliance on the United States. The summit also led to negotiations for a digital agreement to align standards on issues, including consumer protection, to make online platforms safer and more inclusive. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer have announced a new defense co-production agreement aimed at bolstering Ukraine's military capabilities amid ongoing Russian aggression. Zelenskyy met with Starmer in London on Monday after he visited King Charles III at Windsor Castle and unveiled a new industrial military co-production initiative aimed at enhancing Ukraine's defense infrastructure. The UK Prime Minister emphasized the significance of the collaboration, which he said builds on their 100-year partnership and represents a substantial advancement in the UK's support for Ukraine. Zelenskyy said it was a historic moment, highlighting that the partnership would strengthen both nations and expressed gratitude for the UK's continued assistance. The announcement follows a recent escalation in hostilities, with Russia launching a massive aerial attack on Kyiv involving drones and missiles, and comes a day before a NATO summit in The Hague. Ahead of Amazon tycoon Jeff Bezos' wedding festivities in Venice, activists are protesting to highlight concerns over over-tourism and wealth inequality. Activists from groups like No Space for Bezos and Greenpeace staged demonstrations across Venice on Monday, displaying banners with messages such as No Space for Bezos and if you can rent Venice for your wedding, you can pay more tax. Concerns have been raised about the strain on Venice's infrastructure, and activists argue that the lavish event exacerbates issues of over-tourism and neglects the needs of residents. Local civic groups have been staging protests against the wedding since last week.
A stationary front is moving north again, bringing monsoon rains across the country today. And this morning, rain is falling in Jeju and parts of Jeollanam-do province, which will gradually expand to more regions. And the capital area will receive showers when you head back home from work this evening. While Jeju will see rain letting up this morning, other regions will experience rain continuing until tomorrow. Busan and Gyeongsang-Namdo province could see up to 80 millimeters. The rest of the country could receive up to 60 millimeters with pouring rain at times. And as the rain arrives this evening, the Seoul metropolitan area will continue to experience daytime warmth, getting up to 30 degrees Celsius here in the capital. But southern regions will notice highs going 5 to 7 degrees lower than yesterday, getting up to 25 degrees in Daegu and Gwangju. Then the monsoon rain will return to the central regions this weekend again, so please stay safe and dry.
Now that's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.